In last week's episode, we talked about Godwin's Law, Lewis's Law, and Poe's Law. I claimed that the wage gap is real and said that egalitarianism is a men's rights project.
And you were right about that last one. Egalitarianism, the commitment to equal rights, opportunities, and treatment under the law, is indeed a men's rights project.
We got a lot to talk about.
We do!
I know that the very popular statistic that women make 77 cents to every dollar that men make is one that has been debunked in a lot of situations. I have seen those posts and those papers. They're very interesting. But
what? The 77-cent wage gap statistic is almost invariably brought up by feminists and pro-feminists in the context of discussions of equal pay for equal work. Obama has repeatedly used it in this context in his speeches, although somehow his own wage gap, the 80-something cents he pays his female staff compared to their male peers in the White House, well, suddenly there's just all these other things we need to consider before we declare the Obama administration to be discriminating against women in terms of pay. You know, things like hours worked above and beyond 35 a week, hours of overtime worked, salary negotiations, relevant education and job experience, length of employment in the organization and in the field, leaves of absence, number of sick days, etc., etc. You gotta look at the context, Mike. When does Obama use the wage gap? When does he bring it up? Is it when he's pushing for legislation like the Paycheck Fairness Act or the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which are designed to eliminate discrimination against women when comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges? What are the words he uses when he brings it up? I don't know if you've heard this before, but I certainly have. Women deserve equal pay for equal work. The 77-cent figure is not inaccurate per se, but the context in which it is almost always used by politicians and feminists is misleading. Intentionally so, given Obama's defense of his own wage gap, which employs all of the factors that are commonly used to debunk the overall wage gap between men and women that he so loves to harp on about. How these irresponsible people are using it is what a compatriot of mine recently dubbed dog whistle politics. You don't come right out and say women are paid less for equal work. You just talk about that pesky 77 cents in the context of a larger conversation about equal pay for equal work, and the audience will draw its own conclusions.
It's a travesty that women in America, even today in 2015, only make 77 cents for every dollar a man makes. Women deserve equal pay for equal work.
Now, parse that pair of statements. Neither is factually inaccurate on its own. Women do make 77 cents on a man's dollar, on average, and women do deserve equal pay for equal work. The only problem is that the two sentences have nothing to do with each other. The lie is in how the audience is intended to interpret these two factually unrelated statements made side by side. The connection the speaker wants the listener to infer is clear, otherwise he would not have placed these two independently correct but contextually fallacious statements together. The conclusion that is implied by pairing them is that women earn 77 cents on a man's dollar because they do not receive equal pay for equal work. That is, that women are being paid less for the exact same work due to discrimination. And, as an added bonus of dog whistle politics, the speaker retains the plausible deniability to be able to say,
I never once actually said that women are paid less for the exact same work. Where on earth are you getting that idea from? I would appreciate it if you don't put words in my mouth.
Now, if you can point me to a case where women are paid less for the exact same work with the exact same education, job experience, willingness to negotiate starting pay, hours worked, skills, abilities, everything, I will be happy to look at it. And I would assume so would a court of law.
That doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't something that resembles a wage gap that still exists, because a lot of the support for the disappearance, the claimed disappearance of the wage gap, is that a man and a woman who both have been working for the same amount of time, have the same education, and have the same responsibilities make essentially the same amount of money. And that situation is one that, in reality, as it turns out, is very hard to come by. That for all kinds of reasons, it is unlikely that, say, a man and and a woman who are the same age will have the same responsibility, the same background, the same education, and that there are all kinds of cultural, societal factors that keep that from being the case. And so it can make something that resembles a wage gap.
Resembles a wage gap. All kinds of cultural and societal factors? Like what? Choice? I'm guessing one of the things you're getting at is that fields dominated by women tend to pay less because they're dominated by women, or that women are steered by cultural forces to choose lower paying work. So, I want to take a case study into account. Let's look at a job. The job involves making beds, dusting, tidying, doing laundry, and cleaning bathrooms. Essentially, domestic services. It might interest you to know that I knew a woman back when I was living in BC who earned over $100,000 a year doing this, while taking as much as 2 months every year off to go vacationing. And not only that, she had full extended medical and healthcare benefits, and about 3/4 of her living expenses were covered by her employer. So, in terms of taxable benefits and pay, she was probably making closer to $200,000. Now, the only hitch was that she was working for an oil company in a work camp in northern Alberta. In order to do this job, she was flown in by the company. She'd work 10 to 12-hour shifts, 21 days in a row, and then they'd fly her back home for a week off, which she would spend in the guest room of her parents' house. She would do this for 10 months a year and then spend 2 months vacationing in Australia or, visiting the Riviera or whatever she wanted to do, going on cruises, all of that. And needless to say, the majority of her workmates were men. Now, let's say the government looks at the statistics and says domestic jobs at hotels in the city pay only a fraction of what they pay in work camps in northern Alberta, despite the fact that they are doing the exact same work. These jobs in hotels are dominated by women, and the ones in work camps are dominated by men. This is obvious sexism. Clearly, this is a case of work being valued less simply because of female dominance within that job. So the government orders oil companies and hotels to fix their wages for their domestic workers in order to equalize them. And now both people who work in work camps in northern Alberta and those that work in hotels in Victoria, BC are paid exactly the same, somewhere in the middle. Now, what do you think's going to happen? Wow! All of a sudden, oil companies experience a shortage of applicants as many of their workers ended up getting jobs in hotels that paid the exact same. Hotels, on the other hand, are experiencing a glut in the labor market. And then what happens? Oil companies start offering higher wages to attract applicants who are willing to give up any semblance of a normal life in order to work for them, and hotels are inundated with more applicants than they could possibly employ and are able to offer lower wages as a result of competition for jobs. Once again, men end up dominating jobs that involved long, inconvenient hours, working 21 days in a row and being away from local amenities, family, and friends for weeks at a time. And once again, women end up dominating the lower-paying hotel jobs in town, as many of their male employees just up and left, putting aside comfort and stability in order to aggressively seek the filthy lucre that oil companies were offering. So basically, market forces and the freedom to choose who you work for is sexist. Now, it might interest you to know that there are third world countries that have smaller wage gaps than we do in the West. Does this mean that these countries are less sexist? Iran, India, and China have less gender segregation in the workforce than Sweden does. Does this mean that Sweden is a more sexist country than Iran? In fact, in a massive study of 53 different countries, the findings were clear. The more modern and prosperous the country, the more gendered the choices in field of study and profession tend to become. 50% of engineers in China are women versus 10% in Norway. And as much as Norway has employed massive government-funded initiatives and campaigns aimed at getting more women into engineering, they invariably only produce a 2 to 3% improvement, and when the programs are scaled down, even that tiny gain is lost. It seems clear to me that the more prosperous, safe, and free a society becomes, the more individuals feel like they can seek the work that they find emotionally and psychologically fulfilling, rather than the work that pays enough to feed their parents, siblings, elderly aunts, and second cousins. And according to Catherine Hakim of the London School of Economics, as a field becomes dominated by women, it inevitably decreases in social status and pay due to the greater propensity of women to prioritize things other than money when it comes to their careers. Just like no amount of extra money seems to be able to lure women by the truckload to trade their hotel jobs for 21-day shifts in work camps in northern Alberta, women in the workforce in general are more likely to prioritize things other than earnings when choosing careers and jobs. Female doctors are a great example of this. They've made huge inroads into medicine to the point that in Canada, more than half of med students are women. But they're not as willing as men to work outside office hours, to specialize, to work overtime hours, to work on-call shifts at inconvenient times, etc., etc. They don't want to be available to the same degree men are willing to make themselves available. They take time off to have kids, sometimes years, and when they return, they typically scale down their hours. On the other hand, when male doctors have kids, they typically scale up their hours. One of the very interesting things about this entire debate is the idea that women are pressured to make these choices. Pressured by whom or what? By the lack of economic pressure? That pressure that exists in China and India to take whatever job they can get that pays the most? Are they seriously pressured by lack of pressure? Are they seriously pressured by options? As early as 1981, Thomas Sowell had determined that the wage gap as it exists in the U.S. is not a gap between men and women, but a gap between women who are or have been married and everybody else. In other words, women having the option to not work or to work less if they so choose when they get married and when they have children is one of the primary factors that cause the wage gap. So, as a feminist, what exactly are you proposing to fix this thing that resembles a wage gap? Should we relieve women of this choice? Make it so that they have to work the way men feel they have to? Make it so that women have to feel work-oriented and earnings-oriented rather than doing what fulfills them emotionally and psychologically? And if we did that, if we eliminated the choices of women that largely contribute to the wage gap, what would the feminist response be? Would they be happy with less choice for women but more money? Or are we proposing paying people who work in oil camps in northern Alberta the same as we pay those that have the same job description but work in hotels, a 15-minute drive from home, shopping and nightclubs with shorter shifts, regular days off, and regular access to family and friends? Is that what we're proposing here?
So there are some statistics about, after 16 years, 2 MBA graduates, 1 male and 1 female who were classmates, if the woman, say, takes time off to have a child, that can contribute to something like a 55% wage gap later in their career.
So, serious question. Here's the thing. Having kids is a choice. Taking time off, other than maybe a month or 2 to physically recover from childbirth, that's also a choice. If you know of any women who only took 6 weeks off to have a baby and then returned to work at the same intensity as their male peers who are now suffering a 55% wage gap, please provide me a link, because I really don't think that's happening. All this argument seems to boil down to is that women's choices have consequences. Surprise! Are you suggesting that a woman returning from a 2-year kid hiatus should receive the same pay and the same advancement as a guy who graduated the same year she did and has worked continuously ever since? If we're going to go that far, maybe we should go even further. For instance, in Canada, when someone receives a bachelor in engineering, they're officially an engineer in training, an EIT. They have to work for a total of 2 full years under the supervision of a professional engineer in order to earn their own PEng and be able to call themselves a pro. Well, what if a female EIT has a baby and takes a year off? When she returns to work, she's going to be a whole year behind her male peer who's been working continuously. I think her year of changing diapers and burping babies and getting sore nipples should count toward her PEng, don't you? I mean, she hasn't been doing any engineering work and she hasn't been supervised by a professional engineer during that time, but hey, it's sexist to penalize her, as far as her career aspirations just for having a baby, right? Are you beginning to see how ridiculous this all sounds? The world of paid work is the world of being rewarded for the work you have done on behalf of the person paying you. If you aren't doing that work, you shouldn't be getting paid, and you shouldn't be reaping the other rewards, like advancement and promotion, either. And yet, there are companies in the US, even in the US, the cold, heartless US that does not provide maternity benefits through government, that actually pay their female employees to not perform any work at all for the company when those women choose to have babies. There are companies that pay women not to work, Mike, because babies. And on top of that, you seem to want those companies who have already been paying female employees to do no work whatsoever on behalf of the company to allow women to return to their jobs and reap the same rewards as other employees, both male and female, who have been performing work for the company continuously. If this isn't the solution you're proposing, then what exactly are you proposing? That men have the babies? Because I'm pretty sure that's not going to work. Now, given my definition of paid work, and I hope that's everybody's definition, being a system wherein people are rewarded financially for the work they perform on behalf of their employer, is it just to refuse to offer more money and upward mobility to a person who has worked continuously than to one who has taken years off to do their own thing? Is it just to say to someone who has worked nonstop for 4 years, you deserve no more reward than this person who's only worked 2 out of those last 4 years? If that above scenario is unjust, then how can telling someone who has taken 2 years of the last 4 off to do their own thing, you deserve less reward than this person who's been working continuously for the company's benefit for the last 4 years? Which of these situations is just? Which is unjust? Please, explain it to me. Explain how we solve this without actually creating an injustice.
So that is the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I say that the wage gap is real. And if you want to know more about it, I wrote a long thing. We'll put a link to it in the doobly-doo.
And I'd like to thank you for your doobly-doo. It makes about as much sense as the rest of this video.
It does have research, there are sources, so if you want to take a look at the numbers, please do, it's all there. Relatedly, asking for sources does not make you a bad person. That is not a thing I mean to imply.
Just like Obama doesn't mean to imply that women earn less pay for the exact same work when he talks about the 77-cent wage gap in the context of a larger conversation about women deserving equal pay for equal work. I mean, he didn't come out and say it, right? And heaven forbid anyone accuse him of implying it, because that would be putting words in his mouth.
Rather, I think that a lot of times in a lot of these conversations, there can be an over-reliance on statistics.
Facts. Oh dear. Such inconvenient things. They interfere with people's feels and stuff. On the other hand, I don't see feminists insisting that the 77-cent statistic be retired, or the 1 in 4, or 1 in 5, or 1 in 3, or whatever it was as of last Tuesday, college rape statistic be retired, or the every 15, or 3, or 0.7 seconds a woman is being battered statistic be retired, or the globally women do 2/3 of the work, earn 10% of the income, and own less than 1% of the property, super ultra bogus, has no factual basis in any data whatsoever to support it, statistic be retired. Why, it's almost like when statistics support feminist presuppositions, feminists are all for using them, even bludgeoning people with them. But when someone comes along and provides a different statistic and asks that feminists to demonstrate how and why their statistic is valid or superior, there's some big, gigantic cry of foul ball. You're just playing a distraction game. Also, feelings. Statistics aren't everything, you know. Why, it's almost like feminists will pull statistics out of their ass, and then when someone demands to see the research, the feminists will suddenly retreat from the Bailey to the Mott and claim statistics aren't everything. Numbers can't take the place of genuine human suffering and experience. Also, asking me to prove my statistical claims, well, that just feels like harassment.
Where they don't really get to the heart of some matters. There are some problems that statistics either don't describe or don't describe fully, because a lot of times we're talking about how people feel or how things seem, and these are very subjective problems. They are based in people's subjectivity.
Hi, Mike. I subjectively feel like you're sexually harassing me. Every time you upload a video, I feel as if you're just wagging your big, hard, meaty dick in my face. I know you want me, Mike. I can tell that when you're looking into the camera with that sharp, cold, domineering male gaze, you're imagining me naked and at your mercy. I know this because I feel it, subjectively. I can subjectively read your intentions through my feelings and intuitions, and your intentions are to make me your nasty, dirty, submissive bitch. Expect the cops at your door forthwith, because my subjective feelings are just as valid as empirical reality. You even admitted as much, so I hope you understand that counts as a guilty plea. Or perhaps we could stop prevaricating and subjectivizing things and focus on the facts. You're a smart man, Mike. And while I know that smart can be highly contextual and compartmentalized, it's very hard for me to believe someone as smart as you could be this dumb. Do you really want some lunatic's subjective feelings to mean the difference between your normal life and a prison sentence? Because that's what you get with feels are reals and listen and believe. Not at all. In my experience, the anti-feminist side is more educated about feminism than most people who self-identify as feminists. It's kind of one of those necessities of the job. What we are asking is not for feminists to educate us about their position. We're asking them to prove they are educated about their position and asking them to defend it. Do you see the difference?
When ideally we are aware of the premises and the foundations of the positions that run counter to ours.
You might want to ask some feminists about this, because what I talk about as an MRA is genital mutilation, parental rights, reproductive rights, the gender criminal sentencing gap, selective service, veteran services, male homelessness and suicide, male access to health care and education, alimony reform, and male victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. What feminists seem to think is that all I want to talk about is the injustice of men being expected to pay for dinner on a date, and being unable to get laid, and wanting to have sex with kids, and having to hold a door open for a woman. Also, I apparently want to turn back the clock to the 1950s, even though I apparently also don't like men holding doors open for women or paying on dates. And the craziest thing is, all of this stuff that I talk about is detailed in the mission statement of the largest MRA website on the internet, yet somehow feminists repeatedly fail to be educated as to what MRAs are all about. Why, it's almost like you're projecting, Mike. But what do I know? I'm only one of the most popular MRAs on the planet.
The frustration comes, I think, from the fact that a lot of times asking for research or sources feels like a diversionary tactic, that we're no longer talking or arguing about the thing that we're arguing about. We're now talking about gathering sources, which, you know, when these arguments happen on the internet, whether or not it's on YouTube or on Tumblr or on Reddit, you know, it's very much an in-the-moment kind of thing.
I don't know. Every time I'm in the moment, I feel like I should have to be able to back up my claims. I've been on David Pakman, I've been on the Young Turks, I have sat on a panel with Naomi Wolf, and every single time I was there in the moment, I felt an obligation to back up my claims, Mike.
And so, from my perspective, I think one of the better things to do is to say, oh, I'm unfamiliar with this, I haven't formed an opinion on it, I'm gonna have to go do some research. If there are things that you think I should see that are important for me to know how to argue with this, then I want to know about them, can you tell me about them? But I think it's maybe disingenuous, I don't know.
It's disingenuous to ask someone to support what they're saying with evidence. Is that what you're saying? It's disingenuous to ask someone to support what they are saying with evidence. Just so we're clear, that is what you're saying, right?
To expect that that the other side of an argument, someone who counters your position, is going to also teach you about their position.
And here lies the rub. Most MRAs are more educated in the feminist position than the feminists who are espousing that position. We're not asking you to teach us. We're asking you to defend your position. And we know your position. We know what evidence you have. We know that it's garbage. That's what we know. And we are asking you to present that garbage as if it's valid. And we're expecting that you're going to be embarrassed when you have garbage and you're presenting it as evidence. This is what we're doing, Mike. We are disproving your claims. We are not debating a point. We are disproving your claims. We are not having a nuanced discussion. We're not there to do that. We are there to disprove your claims. And I'm sorry that makes you feel put upon. And I'm sorry that makes you grab at all these kinds of straws. It's derailing, it's a distraction tactic, it's disingenuous, all of this. Yeah, no, back up your claims or stop making them, okay? That's what we're asking. Back up your claims or stop making them. Because if you are stating things as fact, and they are not backed up with evidence, I got no fucking time for you. And that's a real shame, because I really enjoyed your Know Your Meme presentation on, on the whole over 9,000 thing. That was great. That was like totally awesome, right? But I can't respect somebody who is hedging and hawing and humming and making excuses for not having evidence to back up what he says. I know you feel strongly about this, Mike. I know you do, and I know exactly why you feel strongly about this. But that's all it is. It's a feeling. It has no basis in reality, right? No basis whatsoever in reality, in what's actually going on out there. And while I don't hate you and I don't dislike you, I'm certainly not going to allow you to continue to lie to yourself and others. Your feelings are lying to you, Mike. I'm sorry, but they are.
I don't know how other people feel about that, but I feel pretty strongly. And really, I think this is also related to Lewis's law, and this is something that I really should have predicted.
You should have predicted the comments on any article about Nazism justify Nazism. The comments on any article about chlamydia justify chlamydia. The comments on any article about intestinal worms justify intestinal worms. the comments on any article about white supremacy, justify white supremacy, you should have been able to predict that. You should have been able to predict that people would detect a circular argument based on a presupposition as a circular argument based on a presupposition, a law that can never be falsified because it is circular in nature. You should have predicted that. I thought you were smart. I wouldn't touch Lewis's law with a 10-foot pole, even if I believed it, even if I was a feminist. I would never touch it with a 10-foot pole because, honestly, if Mary Daly's dream had come true and we'd, reduced men to 10% of the population and that 10% were living in concentration camps being milked for their sperm like she envisioned in her, fucked up head as a tenured professor at Boston College, right? If that reality came about, that law would still apply. Comments on an article about feminism saying feminism is wrong and immoral and unjust justify feminism. That law can never be demonstrated logically to be wrong other than by calling it what it is, which is a circular argument based on an axiom that is a presupposition that is held as true axiomatically. And I'm sorry, but you should have been able to predict that. You should have been able to see that flaw in the logic. You should have been able to detect that and say, you know what? Like Karen Strawn, I would never touch anything like this with a 10-foot pole. But you didn't because of your feelings.
And I'm very upset with myself that I didn't. That when I think we talk about Lewis's law being that comments on articles or things about feminism justify feminism, from my perspective, what that doesn't mean is that anyone who disagrees is automatically wrong. I think really what it means is that there tend to be comments which show attitudes that are indicative of the kinds of stuff that feminism is trying to address.
So when I make a video or a post about men's rights and I get comments about man babies and piss babies and whiners and losers and creeps and these guys can't get laid and they're just failures, and not only are they failures, but according to Steve Shives, they're complete failures at life, but they sure are fun to kick around and all of this stuff, right? I can say then that it is a law of the universe that comments saying you're wrong about this, right? Any comments on a men's rights article, right, that are critical, right? That are critical or take a different position, right? That they justify men's rights. They justify me. I don't, again, how could you not see that? How could you not see it? It's so obvious to someone like me. So absolutely obvious. Maybe it's because I have to be careful about the things that I assert, and I have to be able to back them up with evidence, and I have to be able to back them up with reasoning and logic, and I have to be able to do all of those things, right? And you, at least in terms of feminism, have never had to do that. Because all of those things, including Lewis's law, it's accepted as a law, even though it's completely bogus. I see you almost getting it, Mike. Almost getting it. But there's just some piece of you that doesn't want to get it.
These are comments like, get back in the kitchen, that's just the way things are, women don't have it so bad.
Manspreading. If women's biggest complaint, if their most publicized complaint is that men spread their knees more than 7 inches apart on the subway, they don't have a whole lot to complain about. They don't have it so bad. I'm a woman. I was married, I had 3 kids, I got divorced, I went it alone, and that's not just alone as a single parent, but alone financially. No welfare other than 6 weeks of welfare. I don't apply to programs designed to augment my income as a poor single working mother, right? I have done all of this. My life is really not that bad. It's really not. I don't have it so bad. I know I don't have it as bad as a man who is not allowed to see his kids because his wife made a spurious claim of not even of violence, but well, I'm afraid he might become violent, and then gets a restraining order on that basis. I know that my life is not as bad as somebody who has to deal with a false rape accusation in college, where all it takes is a 50% burden of proof to expel you and ruin your life, right? I know I don't have it as bad as most feminists tell me I do. My life is pretty good, Mike. Single mom, was a member of the working poor for years and years, 3 of them as a single mom. Like, I don't understand how you somehow think that women don't have it that bad is a horrible thing to say, or a retrograde and a regressive thing to say. Women don't have it that bad, Mike. They don't. And when they do, there's programs and initiatives and shelters and fucking services for them for when they do have it that bad. You know, like, you seem to think that anybody saying, you know, women are doing okay is some kind of crime against women. What the fuck is with that?
But I think that there are a lot of really fair criticisms of feminism. There are criticisms of feminism that I have, and I think that those are things like feminism is not inclusive enough. Feminism seems to lack consistency, and
I think the word you were looking for is coherency. Feminism seems to lack coherency.
This is both confusing and unpleasant. There are legions of people on Tumblr who appear to be using feminism as a bludgeon.
They are using feminism as a bludgeon, Mike, just like their predecessors in the National Organization for Women and other feminist initiatives and groups have. They're using them as a legal bludgeon, and a policy bludgeon, and a social bludgeon, and a sexual bludgeon. Just because you're noticing this now when it comes to other kin and the rights of people to have their headmates respected as individual persons. That doesn't mean that feminism has not been a movement prone to excesses and political bludgeoning right from the get-go.
I think that all of these things are very, very fair criticisms of feminism, ways that you can disagree with it, where you are not somehow proving or reinforcing the set of attitudes that feminism as a methodology is trying to address.
Like what, Mike? That violence against women is wrong? I don't know, you can go all the way to Blackstone. What did Blackstone say? Oh, those men back then, they were horribly violent toward their women, but we in these enlightened times, we men here and now, we're not like that, right? You can see it in every cultural group. You can see American conservatives slandering Muslims for being violent toward their women, and you can see fundamentalist imams, you know, saying that American men are violent towards their women, and oh my goodness, it's almost like this is a universal human value that violence against women is wrong. And yet feminists seem to believe that they're the only ones who believe it, and they have to teach us all that violence against women is wrong.
Which brings us finally to my statements about egalitarianism. I want to emphasize that I am legitimately confused about a lot of the stances and politics surrounding egalitarianism.
Equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal treatment under the law for all individuals. What's so difficult to understand?
And I think that this is a multi-part problem. In my mind, there are, of course, all kinds of problems that are experienced by all kinds of people throughout the world. And my stance is that feminism is appropriate for addressing a lot of them. And
I disagree. I think that feminism is based on a faulty set of assumptions, and because of this, it is inadequate to address even problems that affect women. Essentially, you're working, they've built their house, and it's the most beautiful house. It's the most beautifully constructed house with like wonderful trim work and beautiful drapes and nice carpeting and all of that, but it's built on a flawed foundation. And because of that, the house is not sound. Feminism is not an adequate tool. It is not a tool to assess the interaction between men and women in society. It's just not. Now, whether you feel that could possibly be the case, that feminism is completely illegitimate, or whether you feel that feminism is still legitimate when addressing women's issues, I would ask you to kindly respect the rights of men to address their own issues in their own way through the lens that they choose.
I believe that feminism is appropriate for addressing problems experienced by women and problems experienced by men. And I realize that there are a lot of people who do not believe that. And that is great and fine, and that's how the world works. And the last thing I want to do is to take down a group of people.
You didn't want to take down a group of people, by putting on a fedora, tipping it and saying, "Milady." You didn't want to mock the group that I belong to. You didn't want to make us seem like a bunch of idiots. You didn't want to discredit us. You didn't want to do any of those things when you did that. I mean, come on. Just own up to it. Seriously. I'm not going to be mad. Everybody does it. It's like if I was mad, if I had the energy to be mad at everybody who mocks men's rights activists, then I'd have the energy to, power the entire freaking grid in my neighborhood. I just, honestly, I just own up to it. Just own it.
In such a way that it makes it seem like I'm telling them that their beliefs are wrong.
Which you did.
Or that they are not entitled to them, and most of all, I don't want to do it in a way where it's not friendly. And, last episode, not friendly.
On whose part, Mike?
It wasn't friendly. Regardless of my personal politics, Idea Channel is a place to encourage friendly conversation, and there were no shortage of things from last week's video that really transgressed that aim. That doesn't mean that we can't talk about political things, and it doesn't mean that we can't talk about these big, almost incendiary topics, but it means that it's my responsibility to start them in a place that sets the tone, and making fun of people is not a good way to set a tone.
Depends on what tone you want to set, Mike.
For a friendly conversation. So that was absolutely my bad. I've actually been thinking a lot about, and this is gonna seem like it comes out of left field, Tyler Oakley, who I love and whose videos I love, but I also love the fact that Tyler is so welcoming. He's so welcoming and understanding and has this nuance when talking about things that might less than charitably be labeled social justice concerns. And I think that that's a thing that I tend to forget sometimes that I am fully guilty of the judgmental feminist.
Judgmental feminist? Such a thing does not exist, surely.
Stereotype, and I like to think that I will actually learn my lesson now that I've learned it. I think this is maybe the 4th or 5th time.
If this is the 4th or 5th time that you've been asked to explain yourself and your views and defend them, well, you got a ways to catch up.
That we will accomplish a lot more if we start these conversations from a place of respect and nuance, and not just, you know, being mad that the other side is wrong when, you know, the other side is not wrong. It's just another side.
Another side of what, Mike? Does 2 + 2 = 4? Is the other side, you know, the side that argues that that's wrong? Are they just another side? Their opinions are just as valid as the 2 + 2 = 4ers? Really? Seriously?
You know, like I get mad about things, I take stuff personally, but there is a time and a place for that. I can go out and have beers with my friends and say, you know, and another thing that this guy on the internet said, but not on Idea Channel, which is, like I said, you know, it's a place where...
Unless Idea Channel is not owned by you, it should be a place for you to express yourself, even all of those angry thoughts. Honestly, I'm 100% for freedom of expression, and if people are pissing you off, you should have every right to express that. I don't see how that's a bad thing. Freedom to say what you want.
Where we should be able to come together and have these productive conversations. So, I'm gonna try real hard to do more of that in the future, and I hope that for both sides of this very complicated debate, that you know, we can help each other figure that thing out. That we can be tolerant, we can be calm, and you know, if I can set the right tone, I think that we can actually feel like we're accomplishing something, which is what I want to do.
I remember running into a man who I knew who was an engineer, and I hadn't seen him in a while, and he was telling me about work and how he'd gone to this big meeting, and his takeaway from that meeting was, hey, we got nothing accomplished, but at least we had consensus.
So, yeah. Thanks. Maybe in advance, but definitely for watching this far.